Feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small pond in the shrimp tank.
Welcome back to another episode of the Shrimp Tank. We come to you virtually from Seattle and the entire Pacific Northwest. Listen, if you want to learn how to start, grow, or run a successful business, this right here is the podcast for you. This is where we say street smarts and book smarts collide. Hello again, everyone. I'm Dan Whedon, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Michelle Baumberger. We are excited to have our guest, Marcie Glenn, from Another Source, joining us today. Since returning to Another Source in 2000, Marcie Glenn set her sights on revolutionizing the recruiting process by creating alternatives for recruiters to use in complementing their current recruiting practices. She's now CEO, and Marcie is passionate about the candidate experience. She began her career at Ernst & Young after earning a Bachelor of Arts in Accounting from Seattle University. She is a self-proclaimed competitor, playing competitive tennis through college, and is now a fierce but fun cranium and risk player. I don't know, Marcie. We may have to ask you about that. Welcome. We will be with you in just a minute. Listen, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. We're on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and YouTube. You might say, Michelle, that we are ubiquitous. We come to you from about a dozen cities, including Atlanta, Boston, Boca Raton. Now, before we bring on Marcie, Michelle, how are you doing?
I'm good. Enjoying that bit of sunshine outside. Finally, we've had torrential rains for what seems like ages.
Well, yeah, and it seems like every time you've been coming on this, you've been someplace else. I believe last month you were in Washington, D.C., if memory serves correct.
Yep.
You're
nice to get back out there, isn't it?
Yeah, you're back in Bellevue.
I am.
So listen, you know this, and some people might know that my part-time job, my only W-2 job, I guess I could say, is I am the high school golf coach for the boys team at North Kitsap High School. We just ended our season. We did have 2 kids go to the state tournament, and I just am back from Olympia from that. And my sights have turned to recruiting, believe it or not, recruiting 8th graders, because I'm losing 4 seniors, and I've got to replace them now. And so I'm going to be out next week recruiting 8th graders. I never thought I'd say something like that, but that's what I'm doing. To talk about, forget baseball, forget track, no soccer. Let's go play golf. It's the best sport out there. And so it made me think a little bit, because we have Marcie on and we're going to be talking recruiting. How's the recruiting landscape for attorneys? Do you have any? It used to be there were attorneys all over the place, but are you suffering kind of the same staffing issues that everybody else is?
Yeah, I think it's tough out there no matter what industry you're in. You look at the job postings, and I hear from everybody that the volume of candidates that they're getting is pretty low. And where we've actually found some success is we hired a VP of Client Services who has a really strong network of young and mid-level attorneys, and that network has actually proved to be one of the better resources, because just the typical throw it out there and hope for the best is really not kind of returning the quality candidates that we would be looking for. It's a process.
Yeah, no, it's everybody. And I remember when I heard you say something about having trouble finding attorneys. It's like, oh my gosh, I never remember hearing that. But this is probably, Michelle, a good time to bring Marcie Glenn in. Marcie, welcome, first of all. And I'm going to bring you into this. You probably are not in the market for recruiting 8th grade golfers. I'm guessing that that's not part of it, but I bet just about everything else that includes an adult potentially could be. So please, again, welcome and share with us, what do you see in the state of recruiting, of where jobs are and that availability, and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thank you, Dan. It's great to be here. I thought those 3 questions are big questions these days. What do I see in the state of the market? I would summarize that by sharing with you that I see a convergence zone of competing factors that none of us in business have ever had to compete with and against at the same time previously. So what we're experiencing in the market, whether it be attorneys, whether it be hospitality, whether it be finance or potential golf pros, so to say, we're dealing with factors that are here for the long term. And as Michelle said, we're going to have to learn how to shift our perspective in order to recruit great talent for our businesses to thrive. Some of those convergence factors include the labor shortage, which we are all familiar with and have experienced at times in our careers before. We also have a serious population growth issue that most of us have not experienced or had to compete within in our careers to date. We also have this conversation that is becoming very comfortable and uncomfortable for others, which is the hybrid remote. That hasn't been a conversation or a factor in employing people at the level that it is currently. We've got pay transparency. We've got states passing pay transparency laws, which are forcing employers to communicate differently, which creates new opportunities, but also creates new challenges around recruitment and retention. And then we've got this opportunity really to help us shift to build more productive teams and address some of the unconscious bias and systematic racism that occurs in recruiting in general. So lots of things going on in the market, which is why it's hard. And I'll share some stats as we go through our conversation today. What do I do? I think that was the third part of your question.
Yeah, you kept this all boy. I gave you 3 tough ones, and you got them all in line.
Okay, good. I'm off to a good start here. Another source builds the best candidate pools within a fixed period of time with guaranteed results. And we do that by focusing on the front end of the recruitment process and freeing up hiring managers like yourselves to do what they do best, which is interview and select. Our goal is to make sure they have a robust candidate pool to do so. So we work in partnership, really exemplifying each other's strengths in the recruitment process. And in the end, hoping to expedite that as well.
So you mentioned a few things that are, new, at least new to many employers, as far as things we should be thinking about in our recruiting process. How have you seen that change your business? What have you done differently to react to that and help your clients find those candidates?
I think there's a few different things that we've had to do from a business standpoint. And I think there's also some things that we went back to doing in a business. And I think some of those are lessons that we've learned along the way as business leaders, is sometimes it's best to innovate and sometimes it's best to work smarter versus harder. And I differentiate those in our organization. The market for us currently in trying to attract and engage a candidate pool is probably about 5 to 10 times more effort than what we would have to do previously. So a very simple reach out to a prospect, to someone who's never heard of us or potentially the organization that we're recruiting for or that knew of the job opening. Typically we could engage their interest or at least a yay or nay in 1 to 2 touches. We're probably at 5 to 6 touches just to break through that noise. So that is just really simply increasing the amount of effort that we have to put through. We've leaned on AI tools to help us do that in a better way and increase the amount, I shouldn't say the amount, the ways that we can reach or get in front of individuals. It is adding new tools, continuing to be consistent in the way we approach individuals. And then I think one thing that is really relevant but sounds very simple is there is a level of fatigue out in the workplace that I don't think any of us have ever experienced. Professionals are tired. We've just battled through a pandemic, are still battling through that. We're, addressing various issues in our organizations that some of us have never dealt with before, and we're tired. And so the idea of going home tonight and writing a cover letter or applying for a job with an 8-minute application is daunting and it's disengaging. And so we've had to really think about how can we shorten that for people? How do we fight that fatigue factor for our clients when they may have certain regulations or processes that can't be overlooked in order to be compliant?
In your previous answer, you talked about 2 topics that I definitely want to make sure we dive into. The first one was around the whole virtual. I mean, which exploded, obviously. It was coming before the pandemic, but it
Mhm.
by necessity really exploded, and it's accelerating. There's no turning back. But the one I want to talk about right now, or at least ask my question on, is around DEI. And there was a couple things that crossed my mind. Number one is we had a guest on just a few weeks ago talking about startup funding and how incredibly different the questions from the same people looking to fund were different for men versus women. And not only, when we're looking at gender, but when we're talking about the statistics around race and all of that, would you share some of your thoughts about DEI when it comes to recruitment?
Mhm. Absolutely. I think there's a couple of things that I would use this time to share with the audience. The first is unconscious bias plays a really large part in a lot of things that we do, and in recruiting it especially comes across. I'll share a story for me and how I identified some unconscious bias that I had that didn't know that existed until I really dug into learning how we could be addressing this. You mentioned, Dan, that I grew up playing competitive tennis, and I played through college, which was really blessed to be able to do, and also married a college athlete as well. So collegiate athletic world, people in it is very part of my identity and our community as a family. And as I started getting into unconscious bias, realized that when I was looking at applicants, whether that be a resume or when I was talking to applicants in a conversation, if they had identified as a college athlete, I was skipping certain questions because I was assuming that they were like I was and could balance the schedule, could work part-time, could perform at a high level of athletics. And that, of course, requires goal motive orientation, organization, etc. Things that I maybe have as strengths, but I was assuming that they did as well. And that just isn't the case. And so the downside to that is by skipping questions or assuming that they have these, I don't uncover the true strengths or weaknesses of that person. And I'm not being fair to those others in the recruitment process that I am asking those questions. So I start to create some inequity just based on that kind of that affinity bias, if you will. So I think unconscious bias is something that all teams can be doing to create a better opportunity in our current market. They might see alternative workforces. They might be able to identify someone for their team that can add to their culture by addressing some of the common unconscious bias that occurs in the interview process and the recruitment process. Some of those big ones that I see constantly, probably weekly, they come up. That's the affinity bias, which is the one that I just shared, which is a tendency to be biased towards people like ourselves. So that's education. They went to my alma mater. They go to the same yoga studio that I did, or they live in my community. So I know the commute. I know they'll be able to do it. The horn effect, one not so attractive thing about a candidate, and that allows us not to see all of the good side of that. Where that typically shows up in the recruitment process is one typo in their resume, in an email or a cover letter, and I fail to see all the good things in that candidate. The opposite of that is the halo effect, the tendency for us to view an individual's attributes as exceptional. And so I'm not able to see the downside of that, or other downsides or positives to the candidate. A great example of that is you're hiring for someone to help on a project with an implementation, and you see that, Bobby or Susie has done the implementation. And so you assume that they can do all the other parts of the jobs because they've done this implementation without asking what was their role in the implementation? How did it go? How did they balance that with other opportunities that they had for their responsibility? And then the last one that comes up a lot is the bandwagon effect, which is the tendency to believe or to move forward because others in the interview panel are agreeing. So they just decide, you know what, I'm the fifth person and all the other four people are a thumbs up on this person. I'm not going to say anything.
One of the things I really appreciate about working with you in the past and how much I've known you over the years is the intentionality you bring to your business. And this is a great example, what you just described about how you think about being the best you can be in service to your clients. Before we go to our first break, though, I wanted to dig into a little bit about your history with the company. When Dan introduced you, he said when you became the CEO in 2000. So I'd love to hear a little bit of that backstory about your business and your family part of your business.
Okay. So I was working at Ernst & Young right out of college, as Dan mentioned, and I went on my honeymoon. And when I came back from my honeymoon, I realized that my work was in the same spot that it was when I left. And at that time in my life, and probably still true today, one of my intrinsic motivators is recognition. I want to ensure that the time that I'm spending with my work is recognized. It's a huge motivator for me. And to see that my work was in the same spot after 3 weeks, I realized probably not doing the type of work that I should be doing in order to be motivated and have my cup filled up going forward. I shared that with my mom, literally as I was unloading the dishwasher on a weeknight. I remember the conversation vividly. And she said, Marcie, why don't you come to work for me? You can have an impact on the bottom line every day. I don't even think I asked what I would be doing, although I had worked with another source during college. I knew what they did, but it was very intrinsic for me. It didn't matter what I was doing. It mattered that I could have an impact on a day-to-day basis. So I joined another source on April 1st, 2000. So I just finished 22 years, and every year it's a joke on me that it was April 1st. But during that time, when I started working with my mom closely, we had, of course, a plan. And as we all know, plans can be 4-letter words. And so we were quickly turned in a different direction based on the market that occurred just shortly after joining. And as we fast forwarded through about 5 years of working together, she came to me and was going to retire. And the choice was she was going to give me an opportunity to buy the business, or she would start looking out on the market. And I think initially it was a challenge. Like, can I do this? Can I own a business? Can I be CEO? And to my mom's credit and her wisdom, she hired a facilitator for us to talk with, and he asked us to peel back an onion. I say us, my husband and I, to really understand why we would want to buy a business and what that would look like. And I appreciate that. I'd like to think my mom knew me and that competitiveness might have been getting in the way, and that there needed to be some more thought around it. And eventually, as you know, we decided to move forward, but we got really clear on why we wanted to do that. And I say that because the facilitator was fabulous. All the conversations we had was fabulous. But a big part of my transition into buying a business and becoming CEO is that I failed to prepare to be a CEO. I did a lot of work on why and how to buy a business, why I wanted to, what that would look like. But I failed to really give time to understand what it would feel like to put on the CEO suit, so to say, day one. And that was, it didn't fit right at all. So we can talk about that, Michelle, too, in a little bit on what it looked like going forward from 2006. But January 1st, 2007, I felt like I had a straitjacket on and couldn't move. And I felt constrained and had no idea how to be a CEO. Knew how to buy a business at that point, but didn't know how to be a CEO.
Well, we do know what we have to do at this point. We're going to take a short break. It's been fascinating talking with Marcie, and please stay tuned, because after we come back from break, we are going to, with our special guest, Marcie Glenn, do our hot or not section of the show. And we're going to find out what Marcie thinks about Zoom interviews. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
Your business is a valuable achievement, your livelihood, and your legacy. Every day you are asked to balance business opportunities and legal risks, but engaging legal adds complexity and expense. You deserve to experience business law the way it should be: practical, responsive, approachable, and transparent legal solutions to support your business in every stage. With Equinox Business Law Group's General Counsel Services, You get a corporate legal department tailored to your business needs. Let us tackle those contracts, HR, partnerships, and IP issues so that you can get back to your most important work, seamlessly moving your business forward. To learn more about Equinox's fixed cost, all-inclusive legal services, visit our website at equinox.law or email contact@equinoxbusinesslaw.com. Equinox Business Law Group, business law the way it should be.
Welcome back to the Shrimp Tank, where we interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm Michelle Bomberger. Our guest today is Marcie Glenn with Another Source. And let's kick off our next segment, Hot or Not.
So Marcie, hot or not is where Michelle and I are going to pepper you with questions about business, about life, about recruiting, maybe even tennis, who knows, or risk. We may have to find out how you're dominating the world now as a risk player. But for right now, you're going to take a risk and listen to my first hot or not question. So hot or not, Marcie, Zoom interviews.
Hot, hot, hot.
Okay.
Yes.
So and not only why, but how can employers improve what used to be, hey, I got to be sitting across a table from somebody to read their body language, to understand them. We're now learning that's not the case, but I bet there's some skill involved there.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking that. I think, first of all, it's hot because it breaks down a barrier. Not everyone has the ability to take time off of work and drive to an interview. So that helps with inclusivity, but it also expedites the process. And I mentioned earlier, we're dealing with a fatigue factor. So the more that we can efficiently work through a process, the better. And oftentimes they can be scheduled at times that are more convenient for everyone. What companies should be taking into consideration, and I put this on the hiring manager's responsibility, is some really simple things that are often overlooked. Number one, anyone that's on that Zoom interview needs to have some training on unconscious bias. Just even in our show today, of course, I'm reading the logos that are showing up behind you. And when you're sitting in a candidate's home and you're seeing things that are on their wall behind them, your brain is wired to automatically think of things unconsciously that could be feeding into what you're thinking of that candidate. So brushing up on unconscious bias training could be a great thing to do for Zoom interviews, just based on what we're exposed to. Second of all, again, make sure that the candidate has the freedom to share with you where they're taking the call. If someone's taking a call from their car on the lunch hour because that's the only time they have, the picture might show up horizontal or vertical, and that might look different than the rest of the participants. And there may be some surrounding noise that potentially can come into the conversation. That needs to be talked about ahead of time, and the hiring manager needs to ask so that it takes away any of those things that can come up and distract. If people already know, hey, Susie or Bobby's going to be in their car taking the call, all of a sudden that removes any distraction and we can really focus on the conversation. The second is, or third, I should say, don't assume everyone has the same level of technology that we do. We're a Teams company. Some of my clients that are phenomenal leaders don't use Teams. And we end up starting a meeting 15 minutes late. I forget that. And so remembering that in a candidate experience, it can be the same thing. So I'd say those are three things.
Yeah, I love those because I know that when I've been interviewing, what someone has in their background or the way that they're, you think, why did they choose that room to do that meeting? Mm-hmm. So that's a really great observation. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Along the same lines, hot or not, cover letters.
Not hot, not hot, not hot. Cold, cold, cold.
Sounds frigid.
Woo. Yes, yes.
Why?
What I would say to the audience, and probably not need to say anymore, is if everyone can take a second to think about tonight around 7:30 after dinner's done and the dishes are done, why don't you all go sit down with your laptop and write a cover letter for a job that you only know a few things about, a company that you've never interviewed with, and make it sound like you're the perfect candidate. Is everyone up for that? No, don't need to say anything else.
So I have to. I'm gonna suspend right now, hot or not, because this has come to my mind, and if I don't ask this, I'll forget it. I'm just envisioning. I mean, I entered the workforce for the first time in 1987. So everybody kind of now knows how old, 35 years ago. And probably for the first, I don't know, maybe until I guess I stopped being an employee for somebody else, everything about looking for a job seems to do with something other than your skills. It was what you were wearing. It was the cover letter. It was the lack of typos. It was the research you did on it, and it seemed like there was a ton of unconscious bias. I mean, it was who you knew, right? It was always who you knew, what school you went to. If you went to Notre Dame, I wasn't going to hire you. That was for sure, right, Michelle? But you know what I'm saying? It was everything. It was everything but maybe how good of an employee you're going to be. When did that shift to, or at least it seems like there's a shift. When did that shift of, hey, we really need to find the right person for this position? Has that started? When did it start? And where's it going?
It's hard for me, Dan, to put my finger on when exactly it started. But I would share with you, again, it probably was a convergence of many things. Today happens to be the 2-year anniversary of George Floyd's death. And out of that came a lot of conversations within communities and organizations about what we can do differently. And in that led to further DE&I conversations within corporations, which is where our conversation is focused. And as I think people learned more about DE&I and unconscious bias that can come up as a result of that, some of the things that we have changed. You gave me a spurt of thought of a thank you note. If you've ever heard a hiring team say, well, I didn't get a thank you note from Susie, but I got one from Bobby. Okay, well, maybe Susie didn't grow up with a family that taught her how to write thank you notes, and Dan did. What does that change between Susie and Bobby's ability to do the job and add value to your culture and to your organization and form a productive team? So that is a great piece of it. You also bring up, and Michelle, you mentioned this at the beginning, someone brought a great network, and Dan, who you know. That is incredibly important in today's market, given all of the factors that we're facing with. One of the things that we need to do in that is ensure that we're branching out into our network beyond just our immediate community. We naturally surround ourselves with people like ourselves. And so if we want to have a more diverse pool, and diversity can present itself in a million different ways, if we want to have a more diverse candidate pool, we need to make sure that our community, and when we reach out to our network, is beyond just the immediacy of our immediate community. We have to reach out to communities a little bit unlike ourselves in order to attract that and work through others' networks.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's something we've been looking at for a couple of nonprofit organizations that I've been working with as well, is how do we broaden that exposure? Because typically the kinds of folks who come in are related to our existing network and our existing pool. And so it's got to be a more conscious act to reach out to find places where you can introduce that organization to different people and different cultures and different environments. So another question, again, sticking with the recruiting side, is technical versus emotional hiring. We've got this sort of soft skills focus versus the hard skills focus. Where are you seeing those trends?
I'm gonna say the trends that we're seeing based on where our experience is, which is we do a lot of mid-level positions, positions you'd find at a corporate office. So we're not doing nurses, we're not doing software engineers, etc. And so what I'm about to say, I want to validate that, because in a role of a senior accountant, there are certain technical skills that they must have in order to be able to perform the role that's given. However, I'm seeing a lot of organizations start to flex on the types of experience they've had, the systems, removing certain years of experience and requirement, and giving more weight to how they did the job in their last environment and with what tools, and can they be effective doing it here in ours. So we're definitely seeing a trend of lightening up those technical skills with a focus on, gosh, if they can help our team be more productive and if they can add value, great. We can train them on Oracle. We can train them on Workday. It doesn't matter if they have 2 years versus 4 years. This is the right person for our team.
So before we head into break, I have a question for you on return on investment. I think I've heard once before that it takes something like 18 months or so to return your investment on a new hire. And I'm wondering maybe even with executives, does that take longer or not? So I guess my question is, how long does it take for a company to, to get that ROI of the initial cost on hiring someone?
When I hear you ask that question, Dan, my thought process tends to go back to what it would cost them if they didn't hire the right person, versus what the return on investment is for the hire. Because I think if you're hiring to create great teams and to advance your mission and vision in your organization, that return should be fairly immediate in terms of how they add to your culture, how they allow your team to be more productive. They may not finish their first deliverable until, 60 days, 70, et cetera. But I think more the question that employers should be asking themselves and trying to find the answer to is, what does it cost me if I don't create a great recruitment process and I'm not retaining those individuals? What is it costing my business to do that?
Well, it's costing everybody something if they're just not listening to our show. They have to listen. We have great guests like Marcie here, and we got to pay the bills now, Marcie. We're going to take a short break to hear from our corporate sponsors. And when we come back with more from our guest, Marcie Glenn, for our Plead the Fifth section of the show, she talked about having a conversation with her mother. We're going to dive in and find out the conversation she's now having with her daughters. Don't walk away. We'll be right back with more of the Shrimp Tank.
Plead the Fifth is brought to you by our corporate sponsors: Ideal Life 360, Cornerstone Financial, First Underwriters Insurance, the Kitsap Sun newspaper, BC Fitness Studio, and the Upstart Group. Please visit our website at www.shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle to learn more about these terrific companies. Now back to the show.
Welcome back to the Shrimp Tank. We interview the best and brightest CEOs and business thought leaders in the greater Puget Sound area and beyond. I'm Michelle Bomberger here with Dan Whedon, my co-host, and our guest today is Marcie Glenn of Another Source. We're going to kick off our next segment, Plead the Fifth.
And Marcie, you cannot ask Michelle for advice on Plead the Fifth. I know she's a legal great mind, but she might be asking you the tough questions, and you get to plead the fifth once, so be very careful on that. You have daughters. Barb and I also just have daughters, and so we've had many conversations. Those were years ago now, as they're much older, but I'm guessing your daughters at the age they are will soon be entering the workforce. What if they're not already there? What is the advice that you're giving them with your knowledge, your experience, your expertise, and the emotional part of your being the mom too? What kind of advice are you giving them?
One conversation that we've been having with our youngest, who's a sophomore in high school right now, which pertains to the workforce, but also the more immediate choice, which is college. We're having a lot of conversation about why is college the right next step for you, and is it okay to not know what you want to do, and why in conversations with your friends does everyone know or think they know what they want to do? So our conversations right now are a lot about different things that you can do in the workforce, and how just because most of the people you know are in a business professional environment, if you love wood shop why don't we explore cabinet making? Or why don't we explore that? Or when we go on a trip and your favorite thing to look at is the culinary schools, why don't we look at culinary schools as aggressively as we're looking at four-year institutions? And so I think that starts to set the tone for what the workforce, or, you know, what you want to do for a living, is that A, you have choice, B, it doesn't have to be the same choice as everyone else, C, and it can change.
Michelle, do you mind if I ask a quick follow-up question? Because I had my own convergence, Marcie, of the talk about unconscious bias and what you just said. And I know that there's at least been an unconscious bias from employers who say, oh, they skipped a year or two before going to college, or maybe they didn't go to college, or maybe they didn't do that. So it wasn't even about going to the right college. It was about going to college at all. And what people were doing. And I'll just say that I know from having spent time on school boards, there's a lot of parents who feel, hey, if my kid doesn't go to college, they're done for. Is that a myth? I mean, is that something that you can myth bust?
Yeah, I would say it's starting to change for sure. I think the environment that a lot of businesses are in are really taking time to decide what's most important that the candidate has in their experience that can allow them to do the job, do it effectively, and be a great team member. And you know, a lot of times that 4-year checkmark box is being unchecked because they value the experience, or they value what they can bring to the team. So it is starting to change, yes. And I think, you know, just like we talked about earlier with hybrid remote, it was coming, but until we went through a pandemic and had to change literally in a week, we didn't know that we could do it. It's the same with things like the 4-year degree. Until we get into a market where, if that's really what you care about, then no wonder you're having such a hard time finding someone. Then they start to realize I didn't need it as bad. And so it starts to open the funnel. You know, I like to use this visual with my team. Like, what are we doing to open the funnel? Are the clients closing it? Are we opening it? What are we doing? 4-year degree is a great one.
Love that. So another plead the fifth.
Okay.
What do you wish you knew about yourself 5 years ago?
I will say, I wish that I knew that you can find greater joy in leading through others than leading yourself.
Can you share a story there?
I'm going to cheat a tiny bit and say that it's a little bit longer than exactly the 5-year mark, but I mentioned to you that I felt like I put a straitjacket on when I became CEO. You know, we are a collection of how we're wired, right? And we know that life experiences, work experiences, all create that wiring. And I grew up playing singles tennis. I didn't even play doubles. I played singles, and it was my problem to solve with a racket in my hand every time. And so to lead an organization, it was natural for me to want to lead the organization myself. And accomplish things myself and solve every problem. That pissed a lot of people off. And I lost a lot of great team members because of it. And it wasn't something that I knew I was doing consciously. It was how I learned to be successful. And so learning how much joy and how much you can learn from others, and how much more successful you can be, how much further you can get with a team. I had never played a team sport, and now I get to play a team sport every day and score goals. And it's so great to see them score goals, or, you know, win a match because of that. It's more fun to sit on the sidelines and make sure they have the right tools and the right rackets and team members to do that.
That's a great answer. Marcie, plead the fifth. What is your reaction, whether it be emotional, mental, whatever, to the word impossible?
Bullshit.
Nice. Nice.
That's just being honest.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're a podcast. You can say whatever you want. We're all good. So
yeah,
no, that's exactly right.
I think you know, the younger Marcie probably would have spent a lot of energy trying to prove it wasn't impossible. The wiser, more tired, mature Marcie would say, let's talk about whether it's possible or not for our business. or for our situation.
Well, let me ask you this, and Michelle, I apologize. I'm going to ask another follow-up here because, I think we all are easy to say, oh, I don't think of impossible, but I've seen too many people in many different age groups that all of a sudden, when the going gets tough, in their mind, it's become impossible. And a lot of times it's a crisis of confidence maybe, or something like that, where impossible does creep into our thinking, and it takes a lot of discipline and mental toughness to root it out. Would you agree?
I agree 100%. I mean, I think we can be our own biggest competitors, mentally, emotionally, physically. So I think, that head trash can create a lot of problems for sure. Yeah.
Well, this is one of our classic questions for all of our guests. If you could take a hobby and turn it into a business, what would that business look like?
I would create an interior design business for individuals that only had about maybe, let's say, under $5,000 to spend on updating or, facelift their house or room. So
is that a current passion or hobby of yours, interior design?
I love interior design. I love the facelift piece of it, but I like to do it under constraint. I wouldn't want an unlimited budget. I would want to do it and say, gosh, I have $500 and I want to change my living room X. Like, that is just pure fun for me. Yeah.
As someone who's going through a major remodel right now, I really could use that.
Perfect. Well, you can call me.
Dan, do you have another one?
No, Michelle, I think you're up to send us to close.
Oh, I'm happy to. I think my messaging is a little slow today, a little delayed, but Marcie, thank you so much for being a guest here on the Shrimp Tank with us. For our listeners who want to get in touch with you or learn more about your company, how do they get more information?
They can go to anothersource.com. We are pretty transparent on great information on how we can be of assistance for maybe someone who's looking for the next step in their career, or for a team that's looking for a partner in building great talent pools. We might be a great fit. So anothersource.com is the best place to go.
Fantastic. And for our listeners, make sure you check out all the replays at shrimptankpodcast.com/Seattle and wherever you get your podcasts, from iHeart, Apple, Spotify, and follow us on our show's social media pages, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram.
Marcie, this has been a pleasure. The time went so fast. I have so many more questions. We're going to have you back on again in the future. Thank you for joining us. Michelle, as always, it's a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you again next month. Everybody, you should do exactly what Michelle said. Go to our Facebook page, like us, follow us. You'll find out how to watch all the old episodes, who's coming up next, and you'll be able to live stream us. Next week, we'll be back again, Wednesday, June 1st. Our co-host will be Craig Swanson. It'll be his second time as hosting. We're excited to have Craig, and we'll have a guest. We don't have one lined up yet, but we will certainly by that next week. But in the meantime, please be safe, be well, and be prosperous, because until next week, the shrimp is back in the tank. So long.
I've been feeling like a shark in a shrimp tank. Big fish, small